We're good to go. Welcome to the Oregon City Council regular meeting for December 18th, 2023. And the time now is 7:08, and we will begin the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Rawson, would you take a roll call of council present this evening?
Mr. Davish? Mr. Drake?
Here.
Mr. Horniak?
Here.
Mrs. Paula?
Here.
Mr. Reeves?
Here.
Mr. Wallenczak?
Here.
Mr. Zale?
Here. Council, Mr. Davish could not be in attendance this evening for a medical issue. Can I get a Clerk of Council Cassie Rolson, Law Director Melissa Pora, Public Service Director Paul Roman, Chief of Police Brandon Deegan, Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Assistant Fire Chief Mark Mullins, Commissioner of Rec Tim Borton, and Finance Director Nick Roman. Council, the first agenda for this evening is the approval of the meeting minutes from December 11th, 2023 regular council meeting.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves?
thank you. I make a motion to approve the minutes from the December 11th, 2023 regular council meeting as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Council, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, the meeting minutes from December 11th, 2023 regular meeting have been approved. Council, we have items for consideration for passage. I need a motion to add items 170 to 175, 2023 for this evening's regular meeting.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, items 170 through 175, 2023 have been added to this week's regular meeting agenda. The first item for discussion this evening, or first item for passage this evening, is presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Public Service Paul Roman. Item 170, 2023, and I will defer to Mr. Roman on this.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance or this resolution is needed in order to obtain what's called a submerged land lease from ODNR. And really what it's for, it's needed to get permits to place rock around a failing flood wall that is on the City of Oregon property right across from the UT Research Center. I did mention this project in our budget meetings a week ago. And what ODNR needs from the City of Oregon is something in writing that states that whatever the work is being planned, normally it's by an applicant who's planning to do work on the lake. They need something from the city that says it doesn't interfere with any other project of the city or of some port authority or some other public agency. But in this case, we are the applicant. We are the ones asking for this permitted work. And it is literally a placement of rock to support a wall that's failing, to give some height to it. It is to also reinforce an existing dike that is already there, again, across from the UT Research Center. It also not only protects the city land, also protects a lot of properties that are there on Luray Drive, just north of Bay Shore Road. So yes, the resolution is really a statement from the city that this will not interfere with any other public project, which is it won't. It's our project. So, but otherwise, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Anybody have any questions or comments for Mr. Roman?
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Roman, in the plat survey that was provided in this ordinance, where would the rocks, is it in the parcel A location to the north of that dike that goes to the west?
Yeah, there's actually three spots that you'd place a rock. So yes, that parcel A, there's a C and a B.
B, okay.
Okay. And just so you know, it's city property, and I don't know exactly when the city obtained it. But there was this little boat launch that's there.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask
It's
you
used
about.
by a couple residents that are there, but it is public. Yeah, it is but it's not a public facility and it's certainly not advertised as that. It's unique.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean that we couldn't use it as a public launch at some point in the future, but that's not the city's plan.
No, and I understand that. For emergency vehicles, like if we had
Correct.
an emergency boat launch
Correct.
and the water was
Correct.
low in the western basin, this could potentially be a secondary.
Yeah, one thought was to even partner with UT to put money into this to make it for research, boats and so on. So
And there's no place to park anyways if
There
you
isn't.
put something there.
there isn't. So really, to me, well, this project really is to raise the failing wall that's there and to protect that neighborhood.
Would it be any benefit to the city and that neighborhood there if we close off that ramp?
No, because there's already a wall that's there that has some height to it. One thought was to raise that another 2 feet to match Bayshore Road, but it's not worth the money to do that. I think
Okay.
the riprap will be enough to protect it.
Sufficient to protect.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Roman.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Walczak. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any other questions or comments regarding item 170? Hearing none, I will assign item 170 as ordinance 170, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read it in the record.
A resolution supporting the City of Oregon in applying for a submerged lands lease from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources for a shoreline improvement project on Lake Erie.
Council. Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of Resolution 170 of 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Ms. Ralston, will you take a roll call vote of council, please?
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Walczak?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Resolution 170, 2023 passes with 6 yeas and 0 nays. Next item is item 171, 2023, presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Commissioner of Parks and Recreation, Tim Borden, and I will defer to Mr. Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a renewal of our contract with the Independent Umpires Association. They provide umpire and official services for all our programs. And so it's just time to update the contract. Essentially, all that's changed in the contract is of course, the price that we pay per game. Depending on the age group, they went up between $10 and $15 a game per official, but this is just a renewal of a contract that we've had for a long time. I talked to Ms. Papura about this. She was in agreement with the contract. We did tweak a few minor wordings here and there, but other than that, pretty much stands as it was in the past, with just those increases.
Thank you, Mr. Borden. There was no increase on the fees that we're paying any umpires. Was that increased or is that the same?
Yeah, there were fees. That's what I'm saying. The per game fee to the umpires was the biggest increase. That was the $10 to $15 per game per age group.
Okay, thank you,
Yep.
Mr. Borden. Mr. Reeves.
Thank you. I'm gonna have a hard time here with my voice. Excuse me. Mr. Borton, I being an athletic director for 13 years and being involved in athletics, they usually freeze those the contracts, for 2 years. We're doing a $10 to $15 increase this year. Was that brought up at anything by the person that negotiated on their side of freezing that for, like a 2-year period without an increase next year?
Not at this point in time, because unfortunately with umpire costs, I'd love to say they're stuck for 3 years, but that just doesn't happen anymore. They've been going up. We were able to hold them. We did this last in 22, 23. They pretty much held the same, but now there's an increase in 24. So my hope would be that this is 24 and 25, but that's not expressly written in the contract.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean,
Right.
we held them to, as a group of athletic directors in schools to a certain number of, of years that we understand the cost increase,
Right.
but I mean, if you start looking at these prices, I mean, I don't want to upset umpires and that, but it is getting little astronomical for,
It is,
a grades 1 and 2, and we're paying $72 per game.
right. And that's up basically $9 from what it was in the last contract 2 years ago. So a $9 increase over 2 years. And the other thing is they did give us, this is for baseball, softball that you see the actual figures for. When we hire officials, and we basically do that for like our soccer, our basketball, those kind of things, we schedule those officials. In this contract, they gave us the latitude to set the pricing for those officials because that's not scheduled through the IUA. Our department schedules those officials. So we have the latitude in those sports to kind of lock those fees in a little bit lower than they have been in the past. Unfortunately, baseball, softball, we just don't have that much control over. And they did assure me these are lower than what they charge to like travel teams and tournaments and those kind of things.
Mr. President, I also see where it says, the city will pay an assigning fee for $40 per team to the IUA. Do we have an assigner that does this, or do we do that in-house?
We schedule all the games. I mean, with Mr. Fox's position, he schedules all the games, puts them on the fields. We send that to the umpires. And then what they're assigning is assigning umpires to those games. So that assigner gets $40 per team to assign umpires to the games. We don't assign the umpires. We just schedule the games. They assign the umpires from their pool of umpires that they have access to.
So it's just mind-boggling to me that the assigning fee is $40 per team.
Correct.
Mr. President, can I jump in here with Mr. Reeves
Mr.
on this?
Wallensack?
Is that $40 per team per game?
No,
throughout the-
just for the season.
Okay, that's
So
what I wanted.
Mr. Drake's team would
So
be
you-
40, your
you
team
have
would be
te-
42.
You have 10 teams that they're signing for, it's 40 times 10, $400 for a
Correct.
year. Great, thank you.
And that covers whether they have 5 games or if they have 15 games, it's the same per team. So.
Perfect.
And
Thank you,
most
Mr.
of our
Ward.
teams have 10 to 12 games in a season.
Thank you, Mr. Wallensack.
Yeah, well, getting back, I mean, that's quite a big fee with, the number of teams that we put out here, and I understand they gotta have a guy that goes and, pushes the button and gets people to do things. I know how the arbiter system works. That's what we're still using,
Correct.
arbiter. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Thank you, Mr. Borden.
Mr.
Council,
President.
any other questions or comments regarding item 171?
Mr.
Horniak.
President. Mr. Borton, if you could, with the assigning fee, Mr. Reeves just asked, so they're utilizing the arbiter,
That's
and
correct.
that's how the umpires are dropping in, choosing their games
Correct.
to identify with there. How does that new fee structure keep us in relativity to other communities around Northwest Ohio? Over the last few years, I know there's been a lot of talk about officiating costs and what that per game fee is. How does that relate to other communities around Northwest Ohio with what Oregon's paying?
We're paying almost exactly the same as what other communities are paying for the most part. According to the IUA, our fees are slightly lower than what other communities are paying because they know we do give them a pretty good bulk of games. So our umpire fees are relatively the same. And the IUA assigns in Sylvania, they assign in Perrysburg, they assign in a lot of the surrounding communities as well. So they have quite a large group to pull from, which is nice. The other advantage of the arbiter is we can look ahead of time and make sure that all our games for the next 2 or 3 days have umpires assigned to them. We can also see if there's not an umpire assigned, and we can alert the IUA, the scheduler, to make sure that they get those games filled. So it does kind of work both ways with that arbiter system, that we can actually see what games are covered as well.
Okay. Follow-up question to that, with the tournaments that we have here throughout the summer, are those scheduled through the IUA, through the arbiter?
Those are scheduled, some of them are through the IUA. It depends on the tournament, whoever's directing the tournament. That we don't schedule those umpires. That's the tournament director's responsibility. All the IUA does, they have first right of refusal. So I let a tournament director know that, hey, you need to talk to these folks first before you schedule anything. If the IUA can help out, they work that out separately with the tournament of what the umpire fees are, what their scheduling fees are, those kind of things. We don't pay anything for umpires or umpire scheduling for the tournaments.
All right, and that was the base to my question is the city of Oregon paying for that, or is the
No.
tournament directors individually are paying for that
Correct.
each tournament?
Correct.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Borton. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Borden. Council, any other questions or comments regarding item 171?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
just to get back to what Mr. Borton said a couple times, I can assure you to find umpires now is pretty much impossible. Actually, these fees I'm looking at, I just talked to a guy who runs 10 tournaments in Columbus today, and he's paying their umpires $60 a game. Plus they're feeding them twice a day, and they put them up in a 3-star hotel. Now, granted, they need 100 umpires for these tournaments. And the only other question I had for Tim was, Tim, if I put on the arbiter that Terry's committed to the game, I'm committed to the game, and Terry doesn't show up, who informs the city that only one umpire was on the game?
Each night, we have a list of who's supposed to be umpiring, and one of our nighttime supervisors' duties is to go around and basically make sure that everyone's there. If there's not an umpire there, they mark that off, and then we inform the IUA that Mr. Reeves wasn't umpiring a game tonight. He was scheduled. Hey, no.
Because he
So
makes
we-
too much money doing it.
That's right.
I love
So
it.
we have a list every night we print off for our games of who the officials are supposed to be, and our supervisors go around and basically check them in for each night. And if there is someone missing, we make note of that. Then these lower fees come in for one umpire, and we get a deduction from the IUA, and we track that throughout the course of the season.
Okay.
So that
Thank
we're
you.
aware.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Borton. Council, any other questions or comments regarding item 171, 2023? Hearing none, I will assign item 171, 2023 as ordinance 171, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read it in the record.
Authorizing the mayor, finance director, and commissioner of recreation and parks to enter into an agreement with the Oregon Officials Association, AKA the Independent Umpires Association of Northwest Ohio, to officiate athletic events scheduled by the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department.
Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
I move for passage of ordinance 171 of 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Drake. Ms. Ralston, would you take a roll call vote of council on ordinance 171, 2023?
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
yes,
Mr. Wallenzeck,
Yes.
Mr. Zale.
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 171, 2023 passes with 6 yeas and 0 nays. Council, the next item for discussion this evening is item 172, 2023, presented by Mayor Michael Safarian, and I will defer to the mayor on item 172.
Years ago, there was a lot of carryover for people, requests to carry over vacation time, and we pretty much eliminated that. The times that we do permit it and people come over, I remember one year we were quite busy. Paul Roman had some vacation time, and we asked him not to take it because we needed him to serve, and it made sense that we would allow him to carry that over. The other occasion would be, this is just one employee, and it's a medical condition, and something I don't, think we would be discussing what the medical condition is or anything in here. But that is the reason for this, is merely 19 hours, 19.07 hours, and that's the reason for it.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, any questions or comments regarding item 172? Hearing none, I will assign item 172, 2023 as ordinance 172, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read in the record.
Authorizing employees of the city of Oregon to carry over in excess of vacation time into 2024 and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenzeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for passage of ordinance number 172 of 2023 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenzeck.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Mr. Ralston, will you take a roll call vote of council on ordinance 172?
Mr. Wallenzeck,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
yes,
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Zale.
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 172, 2023 passes with 6 yeas and 0 nays. Next item this evening is item 173, which is presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and City Administrator Joel Major. And I will defer to Mr. Major on 173.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, members of council. This is the ordinance that would pass the budget for 2024. As you know, there's a lot that goes into this. Every department head puts a lot into this, puts a lot of thought into it. So we really appreciate you taking the time and care of reviewing this and requesting approval.
Speak about that.
And that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Major. Council, any questions or comments regarding item 173?
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I want to echo Mr. Major's comments. I do want to thank the department heads, the administration, Mr. Roman, Nick, that is, for putting a good effort this year, presenting it in a manner that I think council really understood that. Seems like every year we get a little bit better. And I do appreciate the time and efforts that are put into developing our city budget. So as a council member, I want to thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Council, any other questions or comments regarding item 173? Hearing none, I will assign item 173, 2023 as ordinance 173, 2023 and ask Ms. Ralston to read it in the record.
Making appropriations and authorizing interfund transfers on an as-needed basis for necessary expenditures for personal services, other expenditures, and capital improvement programs of the City of Oregon, Ohio for fiscal year beginning January 1, 2024 and ending December 31st, 2024, and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President.
Mr. Wallenczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for passage of ordinance 173 of 2023 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Ms. Ralston, would you take a roll call vote of council on ordinance 173?
Mr. Wallenczak,
Yes.
Mr. Horniak,
Yes.
Mr. Drake,
Yes.
Mrs. Paula,
yes,
Mr. Reeves,
Yes.
Mr. Zale.
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 173, 2023 passes with 6 yeas and 0 nays. Next is item 174. Next is item 174, 2023, presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and City Administrator Joel Major. And once again, I will defer to Mr. Major for any comments on 174.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. President. Thank you, members of council. As we discussed last week under new business for council, this ordinance would create a new boundary for the CRA area that we have right now for the around the town center. And Ms. Rawson, would you be able to pull up the map?
Mhm.
Thank you. If you take a look at the CRA area as it is, you see we carved out the single-family residential development right off of Pickle Road. And the reason for that, and I know I'm kind of explaining this all over again, but I think it's good just because, you know, a lot of members of the public, most people don't really understand CRAs and TIF districts and how this helps finance construction for new developments and infrastructure. So I think it deserves the care and consideration that and the explanation. But the reason why we're carving out this residential section is that residential developments are, especially single-family residential developments, get an entitlement. So an entitlement of, if it's in a CRA area, a new construction project in the TIF district would be entitled to receive 100% CRA tax abatement for any new construction or new valuation increases on those parcels. And as you all know, this CRA area and the TIF district overlay area, which encompasses that, was built this way so that the city can recoup TIF revenues to pay down the debt service for the construction of the infrastructure that's been put in already, and future construction. So if new homeowners of houses that haven't been built yet were to receive a 100% tax abatement over 15 years, that TIF revenue would not come to the city, and thus would put the city on the hook for paying down the debt service of the infrastructure that's already been constructed. So that does not fit with our financial model with how we had planned to pay down that debt service. And as you all know, this is something that's been in the works for a very long time. And obviously the majority of that road construction of that first bond issuance has been completed. So what this ordinance would do is would carve out that residential area out of the CRA area. And then we would still be able to, toggling back and forth between TIF and CRA, but would still allow us to establish a TIF district in that residential area, but would not allow those residents, the new homeowners whoever moves in there, to be entitled to that 100% tax abatement. Essentially the city would receive the TIF revenues to help pay off the debt service for the infrastructure that's been built. So I'll pause there. I hope that makes sense to everybody.
Mr. President?
Mr. Wallen's.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just for purposes, so I understand, we're removing the single-family residential so that they don't have 100% tax abatement, so they would not pay property taxes on that property or the increase for a 15-year period. We will come back and circle that back into a TIF. Therefore, those property tax revenues will be split the same as our general TIF area. They'll be split the same moving forward so that the schools and the city will split that property tax revenues at that point in time.
Correct.
Thank you.
That's the plan.
Thank you, Mr. Wallensack. Thank you, Mr. Major.
Mr.
Council,
President,
any other-
I just-
Mr. Mayor.
Just one other comment on that. And we didn't have that in because the state instituted that in 2022, and we developed this prior to that. There was never that anticipation that they would do that, and we always counted on that revenue to build the infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I will assign item 174, 2023 as ordinance 174, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read it into the record.
An ordinance amending City of Oregon's existing Community Reinvestment Act area boundaries and to authorize the mayor to submit a new Ohio Community Reinvestment Area Program petition for area certification to the Department of Development and declaring an emergency.
Council,
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 174 of 2023 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallensack. Thank you, Mr. Wallensack. Ms. Ralston, would you read it in the record, please? Oh, no, we did. Would you please take a vote of council, please?
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Wallensack?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
yes,
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 174, 2023 passes with 6 yeas and 0 nays. Next item for this evening is item 175, presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Finance Director Nick Roman. Mr. Roman.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is for us to make supplemental appropriations to the 2023 budget. We talked about it in the Finance Committee meeting, but for the most part, the things being done are adding appropriations for personnel, mostly for overtime. And then the rest of it, the majority of it is reductions for projects or items that we did not purchase this year.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Council, any questions or comments on item 175? Hearing none, I will assign item 175 as ordinance 175 and ask Ms. Ralston to read it into the record.
Authorizing and directing the finance director to make supplemental appropriations and inter-fund and intra-fund transfers on an as-needed basis for fiscal year 2023 and declaring an emergency.
Council.
Mr. President.
Mr. Walczak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move for passage of ordinance number 175 of 2023 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Walczak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Thank you, Mr. Horniak. Mr. Olson, would you take a roll call vote of the council, please?
Mr. Walczak?
Yes.
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Drake?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
yes,
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 175, 2023 passes with 6 yeas and 0 nays. Council, we have an ordinance brought forward this evening, an item brought forward this evening, 176. Can I get a motion to add item 176? I think you all have a copy of it now to tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Second by Mr. Horniak. Council, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, we will add item 176, 2023 to tonight's agenda. And on this particular item, I will defer to Mr. Major for some explanation on this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members of council. Again, as we discussed last week, this ordinance would establish and create a 2-parcel TIF district in the same area. And Ms. Rossin, if you could please pull the map up again of the CRA.
Oh,
area.
yes.
And as you all know, if you look in the attachments, Exhibit A lists and it shows a map of the 2 parcels that we're talking about. One on the corner of Coy and Navarre, and one just south west of that. Thank you, Ms. Russell. The first parcel is where the S&G gas station was just built and opened up this fall. And the other parcel is where the new car wash is, the Whitewater Car Wash. So just to kind of explain again in TIF districts, so when there's the existing tax value or the valuation generates a certain amount of tax. So when new construction or an improvement is completed on a parcel, that valuation will increase that following year. So in order to capture that TIF revenue for that aggregate area, this TIF has to be created, and this was brought to our attention recently that we can do this, is create a 2-parcel TIF district so that we can capture that valuation increase off of those 2 parcels. And new construction actually generates the most biggest increases in tax valuations. There have been some renovations in that area, but renovations don't really move the needle. These 2 parcels make sense in creating a 2-parcel TIF district. So we feel that, and rightfully so, with new construction, we feel that this is what would benefit the city of Oregon the most, so that we can capture that TIF revenue to go towards paying down some of the public infrastructure improvements in this area. One of the biggest items being that the Navarre Avenue project, I think, is going to be in 2025. And this TIF revenue would help actually pay for our proportionate share of match portion. So, there's any number of ways to allocate these funds. But we feel that establishing this 2-parcel TIF district is in the best interest of the city right now. So thank you for accommodating on the walking this on. These are complicated. Putting TIF districts and CRA agreements together is very complicated, and a lot of people don't understand. I totally understand. I ask myself, why do I know these things sometimes? But we do. But just know that these are complicated deals, but we are doing what we feel is best for the city. I think this is the way to do it. So,
Thank you, Mr. Major. Council, any questions or comments on item 176, 2023 from Mr. Major? Hearing none, I will assign item 176, 2023 as ordinance 176, 2023, and ask Ms. Ralston to read it into the record.
An ordinance declaring improvements to certain parcels of real property to be a public purpose and exempt from taxation, describing the public improvements to be made to directly benefit such parcels, requiring the owners of the improvements on such parcels to make service payments in lieu of taxes for the deposit of such service payments pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Sections 5709.40, 5709.42, and 5709.43, and declaring an emergency.
Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I move for passage of ordinance 176 of 2023 as an emergency measure.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
Second.
Second by Mr. Wallenczak. Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Ms. Ross, will you take a roll call vote of council for ordinance 176?
Mr. Horniak?
Yes.
Mr. Wallenczak?
Yes.
Mr. Drape?
Yes.
Mrs. Paula?
yes,
Mr. Reeves?
Yes.
Mr. Zale?
Yes, thank you, council. Ordinance 176, 2023 passes with 6 yeas and 0 nays. Council, this does wrap up our agenda for this evening. I'll now move to the mayor's report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And council, you have before you the correspondence that I have to reappoint and appoint one new member to the Board of Zoning Appeals and to reappoint 2 people from the Planning Commission. The new appointee is Miss Erin Curley, and there's a bio of her in there. I hope you find that helpful. Believe she's very, very good choice to add as an architect and with many other skills to bring to the forefront for the Board of Zoning Appeals. And so I'll run right through that list. For the Board of Zoning Appeals, with the term from 1/1/24 to 12/31/26 are these first 3, and that would be Dave Andrus of 6160 Corduroy Road, Bill Reed, 4353 Pickle Road, Dave Golis, 5505 Pickle Road. And then, and I'd ask on those, call it 5, because she's being appointed twice, but I'd ask council concurrence in the appointment to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Dave Andrus, Bill Reed, Dave Golis, Erin Curley.
Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I concur with the mayor on the appointments to the Board of Zoning Appeals as presented this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
second,
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Council, are there any objections? Hearing no objections, Mr. Mayor, council does concur with your selections.
Thank you so much. And now to the Planning Commission. And both of these individuals are currently serve and are being reappointed as of asking for 1/1/24 to 12/31/27. And that would be Greg Vrieslar of 4845 North Teal and Scott Winkowski of 4244 Deer Run. And I'd ask council's concurrence in the appointment of those 2 individuals to the Planning Commission.
Council.
Mr. President,
Mr. Horniak.
I concur with the mayor on the appointment of Greg Vrieselar to the Planning Commission and Scott Winkowski to the Planning Commission from January 1st, 2024 through December 31st of 2027.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak.
second,
Second by Ms. Pauloff. Thank you, Ms. Pauloff. Council, any objections? Hearing none, Mr. Mayor, council does concur with your selections.
Right, and I thank you. That brings both boards to full strength. And other than that, we won't be meeting here until after the new year. So I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year.
Thank you. Mr. Major.
Thank you, Mr. President. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I have nothing to report.
Thank you, Mr. Major. Ms. Purpura.
no report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Purpura. Mr. Roman.
No report, Mr. President, but I just want to say thank you for your service, Mr. Zale. It was certainly nice working with you these years, so. That's it. Merry Christmas to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Same here. Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Zale. I know it's a little bit early, but I would like to make sure that I'd like to call a rec advisory board or a rec committee meeting on Monday, January 22nd, 5:30. That will be to discuss the Boom Fest and the placement of the pickleball courts.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Okay, and with that, like to wish everybody a happy Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And Mr. Zale, thank you for your years of service.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
the
Reeves.
same to Mr. Davish.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mr. Drake.
No report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Mr. Wallenstein.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I've said this multiple times, but thank you to the administration and Nick Roman for your efforts on the budget and presenting them to us. I look forward to a very good new year and wish everybody Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenstein. Ms. Paula.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing from my standing committee. We do have winners for the Winter Wonder Lights and Winter Wonder Tree. The winners are, number 1 is on Brown near Kuzno, and number 2 is on Kuzno. And the Winter Wonder Trees, they're listed on the Facebook page. I really want to thank Hank and Jeanette from the rec department. They put so many hours and so much work into bringing the Christmas cheer and the holiday spirit to Oregon. So thank them for that personally, Mr. Borton. And I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas as well and a Happy New Year. And Tim, I really just want to say thank you. Thank you for putting up with me. And thank you for all your sage advice. I really appreciate you, but I'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Horniak.
Nothing from my standing committee. I'd echo everybody else. I wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Mr. Zale and Mr. Davish, I'd like to thank you both for your service to our community for the time that you're here. Certainly is appreciated having you be here for so many years. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Horniak. And I have nothing from my standing committee other than Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody. Let's make it a great new year. And I will seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Second by Mr. Horniak. Are there any objections? This meeting is adjourned. Finally used it.